Welcome to RegCheck Module 3. This module will address how to define your clinical trial. We'll review how to determine the protocol for your trial, prepare a budget, and also discuss various trial execution issues. Again, the strategy here is to figure out what someone else did that is similar to what you're interested in doing and copy it. The reason for this emphasis is that the agency is not likely to make you do anything less than what they made a competitor do. So let's go back to HairMax as an example of how you can learn the details of what trial they conducted to gain clearance. I recall that the labeling summary will contain some mention of the type of trial they did and sometimes provide results, but typically these are not very detailed. All companies who seek an FDA approval or clearance are required to post the details of their clinical research on this site. The site has a really good search engine, and for example, by typing HairMax into the search term box shown on the slide, you can retrieve the complete details of their protocol and the results of their trials. So in doing that, we can see that this company did 5 trials, and by clicking on the study title of any one of them, you'll be able to see the results. This is, for example, a table that shows the results of their trial, which is probably not statistically significant considering the standard deviation, but nonetheless, it tells you what trials they did and what results they got in order to achieve approval. This is a very important benchmark for you to understand. While we can't be certain which of their trials was used for clearance, if they received approval with these results, it means you needn't do any better. So the site will disclose other important details, such as how long it took to conduct the study, another really good benchmark for your own planning purposes. In addition to providing the details of their inclusion and exclusion criteria and all other aspects of their protocol, it will list who the investigators were by name and location. These could be important people to interview for information or as possible study sites for your study, as they have experience in running the same study you're likely to be running. Part of your work will revolve around how you choose to define your indication range. It can sometimes be helpful to narrow the indication range to aim at optimizing success in your outcome parameters. This can create a conflict, however, between marketing and clinical, because marketing will want the broadest indication range. However, trade-offs often need to be made, and once you have an approval, the actual clinical use often naturally veers toward a wider indication range than that which was originally studied. And companies can manage expansion of their indication range commercially and respond to questions from customers if they have a protocol set up in their company to manage off-label use questions. So when you think about defining your indication range, think about who is your most valuable patient. Well, it's the one who's most likely to receive the greatest benefit, has fewer comorbidities, and more importantly, can be accessed and readily recruited for the trial. A single patient can result in so much learning that it's helpful to see how that can occur. A small observational or pilot study can be critical to your learning process, and it also can greatly improve the value of your technology. Pilot studies are typically easier to get approved than authorization, for example, for a pivotal trial, and sometimes they can seamlessly be sequenced so that if you have good, safe results in a pilot, you can sequentially directly continue into a pivotal. Let's move on to budgeting. The best way to do this is to create a sketch or an outline of your protocol. And the key factors that you need are the number of patients, the number of follow-up visits, and the number of case report forms that will be needed for each patient. You'll need to provide clinical monitoring, which involves periodic visits to each site to check on their compliance and to sort out various data errors that can happen along the way. Lastly, you need to estimate the number of data tables needed for your analysis. If you do those things, any CRO, and there are many, many of them, can give you an estimate of the cost of the trial. Statistics part of clinical research can be overwhelming. However, typically you hire that out to an expert statistician and don't attempt to do that yourself. And it's one of the least expensive items you're going to deal with. To engage one, you'll need to define your endpoints and estimate the difference you think you'll see between the treatment arm and the control arm, as the magnitude of that difference will determine the size of your trial. The more of a difference, the fewer the patients needed. Reviewing other similar trials can help you make the assumptions that are needed. Not for making your submission to the FDA to seek permission to start the trial, where you gain approval of your protocol, there are many other elements that have to be managed, and frankly, somewhat in parallel. There are three that are typically problematic. The first, you need to recruit sites very early to gain help with the submission and attempt to get the site to sign a research agreement and secure IRB approval as close to or as shortly after FDA gives their go-ahead. Otherwise, if this isn't teed up properly, there will be a large delay in the trial start. The second issue is whether you have thought through how you're going to promote and recruit patients into the trial. The longer the enrollment period takes, the longer it extends the follow-up period. And thirdly, it is important to make sure the sites are bringing the patients back for follow-up in a timely manner, or that'll create an additional delay. Study duration is most affected by these three items. And lastly, some time is needed for final cleaning, locking, and analysis of the database before it can be submitted to the agency. All sorts of approaches are used to promote a trial. As was done for this imaging trial in Galway, Ireland, posters were put up on trees in the city. However, today, internet-based promotional programs, searches of a hospital's electronic medical record, are more often used to identify and bring patients forward for consideration. The difficulty of actually enrolling a patient will also depend on the benefit to the patient. In this imaging trial, the benefit was, quote, you will receive a picture of your brain. More often in therapy-based trials, the benefit equation is much stronger. However, most trials include a control arm, and no patient wants to enroll to be in the control arm. The most typical way of dealing with this is to offer those patients in the control arm the opportunity, after follow-up is completed, to receive treatment. You pick and its operating environment is also very critical. The most important player is the clinical study coordinator, because it's this person who actually screens and enrolls the patients, not the physicians. Do they have a good attitude? Are they overworked? Are they too busy with other trials? Your meeting with this person and how they will recruit and enroll is probably the most important consideration in selecting a site. Lastly, sometimes you can be lured into a site due to its high volume, but they might have multiple physicians group at that hospital. And the question is whether they will all cooperate in referring patients. This can be a problem if the groups are competing. Sometimes offering co-PI positions to the competing groups can help. It's best to meet with all the groups individually to be certain. To summarize, we've learned how to extract an enormous amount of detailed information from the clinicaltrials.gov site. This is the best information you can use to draft the first version of your own protocol. Next, budgeting can be facilitated by linking up with a CRO and giving them a sketch of your trial. Lastly, we discussed some of the key typical issues associated with the actual execution of a trial that can help you reduce delays due to the factors associated with poor site selection, recruitment, and patient follow-up management. We hope this is helpful. Listening.